I almost feel like I'm talking about like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot by talking about this. Alright, this was something I didn't think I was ever going to feel the need to talk about, because I expected it to go away, but it keeps cycling back around, and you know what, let's just get my thoughts and feelings and assessment on the record so that I can move on from it. The Snyder Cut. So if you are fortunate enough to be detached enough from online discussion spaces to not know what the heck that is, some background. The film Justice League was originally conceived and was directed by Zack Snyder, who directed Batman v Superman and prior to that, Man of Steel. He was originally supposed to basically frame the entirety of what the DC film universe was going to be. Now, ultimately, that ended up not happening. He left after the bulk of the shooting schedule, or at least the initial planned shooting schedule, had happened, and they had not yet done pickups, and they were still early into post-production. He basically suffered a family tragedy. His daughter passed away, and he left the production at that point. Now, officially, that is the driving reason. It's not unreasonable to assume that there was tension between him and the studio anyway, because the response to Batman v Superman was not what everyone involved had hoped that it would be. That was still a successful film, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as successful as they thought it was going to be, nor was it as praised as they thought it was going to be. So there may have been that sort of underlying his decision that he needed to walk away anyways. The film ultimately would be heavily reshot and reworked and delivered by Joss Whedon. Now, Joss Whedon has a very different feel and flavor to him than Zack Snyder does. So when the Whedon completed version of Justice League came out, there started to be rumblings that there was some Zack Snyder cut of the film. Now, let's be clear on a couple of things right off the bat. Let's be clear about what the Snyder Cut is, if it exists at all. What it is not is a finished alternate version of the film. If a Snyder Cut exists, then it would have been basically what's considered to be a work print. It would have been a rough cut. It would have been an assembling of the footage that was going to be used, but it would not have completed special effects basically anywhere. There would probably be scenes missing from pickups that were going to be expected to be done later. It would be a very unfinished film, whatever state it exists in, assuming that it exists at all. Now, I am going to move forward on the presumption that it does in some form exist. Exactly what it is, how finished that is, or whether what it was at the time Snyder walked away from it was actually what he wanted the film to be overall, it's hard to say. The inclination at this point would be to say probably, because Snyder himself keeps bringing up the idea that there is a Snyder Cut. Now, I'm going to try very hard not to spend a ton of time or energy basically sort of delving into the psychology of people asking for the Snyder Cut, because I'll be honest, I kind of don't get it. I'm not going to say I have no interest in it. I would be very curious to watch it as like a cultural artifact and, you know, to compare it to the released film just to get a better understanding about what changes were made and the way the thing evolved and changed under, you know, possible studio pressure and definitely director changeover. I would be very curious to see that, but I sure don't believe that this is some unrealized masterpiece that we have been denied. So, you know, I'm not going to try and work out the thought process of people who really push this thing hard, you know, and keep bringing it up and cycling it back around again. As for Snyder himself, it's hard to know exactly what the motive from his end would be, because at least as far as official word goes, he left the project on more or less good terms with Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers, again, this is assuming no one involved is lying and everyone has the same story. They all agree on this. Warner Brothers offered to delay and stall the filming of Justice League to give Zack Snyder grieving time for him to come back and finish it himself, but he declined that. So it does seem odd that he keeps pushing, his own cut of a film that he willingly walked away from. Now, again, the circumstances weren't ones he would have chosen for himself. Obviously, no parent would ever choose that. But I wonder if there's two things that I think might be at play for why Zack Snyder himself keeps bringing up this idea that there's a Snyder Cut. The first is that we don't know exactly how drastically the changes were. I mean, you can watch the finished version of Justice League and definitely feel a lot of Joss Whedon in it, but it's hard to know how much of that is dialogue rewrites and how much of that is serious structural rejiggering of the whole thing. It feels like there's that going on, but it's hard to pinpoint all of it. So if we are in a situation where Zack Snyder walked away basically thinking, look, I've more or less finished the film. All you folks have to do is a few pickups and to do the post-production. You can get by without me. And then when the film came out, it was very heavily reworked when maybe he did not think that was going to happen. That might be one reason why he has an interest in the supposed Snyder Cut being released. The other one, if I'm going to be really cynical, his stock as a director is not in the best place right now. It was a while before he started working on his next project. The next thing he's directed that's going to be released is a film called Army of the Dead, which is a $70 million zombie film being released on Netflix. Now, in and of itself, none of these are inherently bad things. There's nothing wrong with a mid-budget movie. I could actually use more mid-budget movies. Nothing wrong with something being released on Netflix. However, this can't help but feel like the guy needs a career resuscitation because Zombies is truly going back to the beginning. His first directed film was the remake of Dawn of the Dead. Dropping down to $70 million, while that's not necessarily a budget to wipe your nose at, that's a big drop from the kinds of budgets he had been handling really since, I guess, Watchmen. I mean, Watchmen was hugely budgeted. I don't know what it cost to make Sucker Punch, but he definitely pulled a lot of clout to get that made. But then there was Man of Steel, there was BVS, there was Justice League. These were massive budgets. $70 million is not a lot, comparatively. So it does kind of feel like he's in director jail, seems a little harsh. Director community service, I suppose. And that might give him a little more motivation to push the narrative that there is a better version of this film that still has his name on it out there that folks just haven't seen. So let's talk about how likely is it that we will ever see this Snyder Cut. Okay, here's where I have to be brutally honest. We're probably never going to see this thing. At least it's never going to be released in a way that is going to make the people who are calling for its release happy. Because whether they are going to own up to this or not, the people who want this released, or at least the vast majority of them, it seems very clear to me, what they want is they want a do-over on Justice League. Now, for whatever reason, whether they just really want to know what Snyder had done, maybe they really liked BVS and they didn't like what Whedon did, who knows? But what they want is to see a completed, finished film, finished special effects, exactly what Snyder would have released to theaters, and we are never going to see that for one very simple reason. There is no way in heck Warner Brothers would ever be able to recoup the expenses of finishing it. Because post-production and special effects are dang expensive. Now, they could release whatever they currently have, which, as I said, most likely is a work print or a rough cut. And they could release it as it is with placeholders and unfinished special effects, and that would cost them virtually nothing to do. But the thing is, and I think Warner Brothers knows this, that won't satisfy the people calling for the Snyder Cut. They will simply then start shouting, you gave us an incomplete movie, you didn't give the film a chance to be seen properly the way it was meant to be seen. But again, like, that would, like, minimum for just using Justice League as a template for how high a percentage of the film is going to be special effects. For my money, minimum $100 million to get the Snyder Cut even vaguely up to a releasable standard in terms of what would have been expected to hit theaters at the time the Justice League movie came out. And Warner Brothers is never going to spend that. Because as loud as the Snyder Cut people are, and as much as, to my frustration and annoyance, it keeps getting refreshed, because the reason this came up is Gal Gadot and Ben Affleck both tweeted out, hashtag release the Snyder Cut. Why did they get on this bandwagon? I have no idea. But it keeps getting refreshed. But what these people want is not realistic. And I'm not even saying I wouldn't like to see that. I would. Said that early on, and I stand by that. But no studio is going to shell out, again, ballpark, at a guess, somebody uneducated, but I still feel confident in this number, about $100 million for a niche alternate cut. That, you know, to placate a relatively small audience, especially when the franchise as a whole is doing just fine in the absence of the Snyder Cut. Aquaman was their biggest film to date. Biggest DC movie to date. Not even just DCEU. Period. Biggest moneymaker for a DC character. Wonder Woman sequel comes out next year. That's probably going to do really well. Shazam did very well. There is a pretty strong connection between the people who liked Batman v Superman, who dislike Marvel and dislike some of the new directions the franchise is going right now, and the people who are calling for the Snyder Cut. And I'm not trying to be dismissive here, but from a strictly numbers game thing, the box office has shown Warner Brothers does not need to placate that audience. Because if this ticked off audience who wants the Snyder Cut, them getting what they want wouldn't boost the box office for the things they're doing. It would shut them up. But like I said, the expense of doing it, I don't think that balances in anybody's ledger. Now, is that me saying, God, I hope people stop talking about the Snyder Cut? Well, yeah, kind of, but only just because I don't think I do not see a world in which it ever happens. And so, when I kind of like, when I see it come up, it's not because I think the sentiment is completely misguided. It's not because I wouldn't be interested in seeing the thing. It's just because, well, it's like the people who did the crowdfunding thing to remake The Last Jedi. It's like, really? You're gonna sink your time into the, because no, you know, this stuff just isn't gonna happen. And for that reason alone, I would kind of like it to stop having to listen to it. But like I said, people keep re-upping on it. Snyder keeps bringing it up. Gal Gadot now, Ben Affleck, and of course the people who have wanted it from the beginning have not stopped asking for it. So I don't know how much longer this whole thing will go on, but I think barring any major revelations or an actual release, which would blow my mind, but barring that, I think I'm done talking about it. The Snyder Cut, what do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Other stuff to do as well. If you like what I do, you can support me on Patreon, which would be something wonderfully appreciated. But even if you don't do that, there are buttons like subscribe, Share this around. Leave a comment, as I said. All things help me out and boost the signal of this channel, but you also don't have to do any of it, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.